September 16th, 1992, New York. One phone call is about to break the oldest currency in the world. Soon, 7 billion pounds are exchanged into Deutschmarks in a matter of moments. The chain reaction commences. Over in London, the Bank of England is in a state of panic. Investors worldwide begin exchanging their pounds, and the pound's value plummets. Blocked from real action, the Bank of England has no choice but to take costly defensive action. They exchange their foreign reserve currencies for pounds in an attempt to prop up the pound. The Prime Minister gets a call. The pound is in free fall. You must leave the EMS. The Chancellor of the Exchequer announces drastic action. Interest rates rise sharply from 10% to 12.5%. By early afternoon, interest rates jump to 15%. But the bluff doesn't hold. By the end of the day, the Bank of England had spent 28 billion pounds fighting a losing battle, whilst 1 billion pounds quietly slipped into this man's pockets. But who was he? And how did one man outsmart the most prestigious central bank in the world? By 1992, the United Kingdom was in the midst of a deep economic recession. The economy desperately needed low interest rates to recover, but one thing prevented this from happening: the European monetary system. The EMS was the precursor to the euro, and stipulated that currencies across the continent were pegged to the Deutschmark. Between 1990 and 1992, the pound consistently traded at the low end of the price range, but the Bank of England was unable to reduce interest rates to boost economic growth because the pound's value abroad would have plummeted below the set range, breaking the rules of the EMS. Interest rates remained high, satisfying the price rules of the EMS, whilst wreaking havoc on the domestic economy. And whilst the economy of a united Germany was soaring to new heights, pushing the Deutschmark's price up, the British economy flatlined, creating a precarious situation for Britain. And one man would soon exploit this vulnerability. 1 month earlier, the first signal arrived. Stanley Druckenmiller, the lead analyst at Quantum Fund, noticed a discrepancy. Druckenmiller and his team calculated that the pound's valuation was artificially too high and subsidized by the UK government through high interest rates. A perfect opportunity to profit from a weakening pound. So, using Quantum Fund as the vehicle, Druckenmiller took out a £1.5 billion loan and immediately placed a short position on the pound. But that was not the only signal that arrived on Druckenmiller's desk. September 13th, 3 days before the fateful day, the Italian central bank came under heavy attack from the currency markets. Italy and the Italian lira found themselves in a more precarious position than the pound. Investors worldwide shorted the Italian lira en masse. The Italian central bank sold billions of its foreign reserves to prop up a currency in free fall and comply with the EMS's price rules. However, the German Bundesbank opted to assist Italy by purchasing additional Italian lira, but with a catch. The Bundesbank would continue to assist Italy only if it opted to devalue the Italian lira by 7%. The Italians agreed, and the next day, the Bundesbank purchased vast sums of Italian lira. However, their assistance was limited, prioritizing domestic inflation control by restricting money supply rather than helping a neighbor's currency. To the ordinary citizen, it looked like the Bundesbank had come to the aid of a neighbor. But to Druckenmiller, this was a clear signal that Germany would sacrifice its neighbors to save itself. But these two signals were not enough evidence to prove Druckenmiller's bet on the pound would pay off. That was until 2 days later, on September 15th, 1992. The head of the German central bank, Helmut Schlesinger, gave an uninteresting interview to newspapers. However, alarm bells immediately rang in the mind of lead analyst Stanley Druckenmiller. "This is the trade of a lifetime," he told his boss in New York, the man who would soon pocket £1 billion in a single day. But what was so damning in this interview that set off alarm bells? At the time, the UK government was telling the world, "The Germans are 100% behind us in defending the pound." But in the interview, Schlesinger implied a different story. "Further realignments cannot be ruled out." A fatal quote by Schlesinger for the pound. It suggested Schlesinger and the Bundesbank would watch the pound and other currencies sink, rather than come to their aid. To the everyday individual, the interview was political jargon, but to the currency market, it was a glaring red flag. The illusion that Germany would come to Britain's aid was shattered. In the evening of the 15th, Stanley crept into the head office of Quantum Fund with a plan to turn his large bet into the trade of the century. His plan was cautious: steadily increase his short position from £1.5 billion to £3 billion. However, Druckenmiller's boss was unimpressed. The plan was pathetic. He didn't want a small return. He wanted world-breaking sums. Following the discussion, Druckenmiller scrapped his plan, instead opting for the jugular move. He spent the night and into the early hours of September 16th, borrowing and selling every pound he could get his hands on, until the sum totaled £7 billion. By the time the markets opened on September 16th, sell orders flooded London. Soon, every prominent hedge fund across the globe was selling pounds. And while the Bank of England was burning through its foreign reserves, the man who orchestrated the whole ordeal sat quietly, watching his position balloon. He didn't have a seat in Parliament or a vote at the Bundesbank, but he had more influence over the pound than any other European politician. By the time the sun set on London, this man had siphoned £1 billion from the British taxpayer, the most liquid cash anyone had ever made in a single day. And his name was George Soros.